The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hello, my name is Martha Roth, and I'm a Minnesota writer and editor of a feminist review called Hurricane Alice. I'm here this morning to talk with Grace Paley, contemporary fiction writer, whose books include The Little Disturbances of Man and Enormous Changes at the Last Minute, Later the Same Day, and a collection of poems called Leaning Forward. This is the first I knew that you wrote poetry, Grace, is when I saw that book. As well as the very beautiful 1989 War Resisters League calendar, which Grace wrote, which is illustrated by Vera Williams. It's called 365 Reasons Not to Have a Nuclear War. And it's
not to have another war.
Not to have another war, thank you. Yes, any kind of a war.
You're right.
And it includes some marvelous poetry as well as prose. You're here in Minnesota visiting the university, I know.
Yeah.
Part on the creative and professional writing program, right?
Yeah.
You're the Edelstein Keller visiting writer.
That's who I am. Yeah.
As well as to be a mentor at the Loft.
Yeah. I have some classes at the university and some talks and that'll be I guess in the next in this week, which let's see, we're in the middle of April, and that's it. Yeah.
Yes. I've known your work for a long time, and one of the things that has impressed me about it is its texture, the density of its texture. Have people asked you about this before? Has this been mentioned by interviewers as a characteristic of your writing, and has anyone ever asked you to discuss it?
Well, you know, I think people probably put things in different ways, and but they've asked me to talk. I don't know. I think what you mean by density is that I used to have this idea when I was teaching. I would sort of tell the class, you really have to get the whole world into the sentence.
That is what I mean. Yes.
Yeah. But actually, the truth is, it's almost impossible. You know. So, but I think it comes from that idea that I have that if you can't get the whole world into the sentence, you can at least get it into the paragraph, you know, and failing that into the story. Yeah.
Yes. Well, you do manage somehow. Sorry.
No.
To do that.
No. Yeah. Well, what I mean is that includes a lot of. It usually includes a lot of some history about the world, a movement back and forth from the private and the personal to the you know, to the maybe regional. I mean,
yes.
I think everybody in the United States is a regional writer. Everybody. You know, you can't be an American writer just like that. You're a regional writer.
Yes, of course, and we all bring different histories with us.
Yeah.
As a nation of immigrants, we have a whole
Yeah.
set of different stories to tell. Yeah. Well, there's besides that wonderful density of packing the whole world into a sentence or a paragraph or a story by selecting precise details, you also have managed to write in voices other than your own.
Yeah.
With a kind of precision and respect that I think is rare at any time in writers, from the voices of Chuchi Gomez and his grandmother to Mrs. Luddy in Enormous Changes at the Last Minute, to old African-American men and small children, infants. Can you talk a little bit about the skills that you're aware of using when you write in another?
Yeah, well, it isn't skill so much. It's I think one of the things that happened to me when I began to write stories, and I'd really written poems till my mid-30s maybe. When I began to write, I didn't know how to get hold of my own voice in a sense, is the only way I can describe it, and I finally solved it by really stretching out to other voices, and it was really only through using other voices I could find my own. And I always suggest that to students, that they try something like that when they're not sure, because there's something about the tension between being yourself, which you are. I mean, no matter what you do, you're who you are. You know, no way out of that.
Sure.
But and the reaching out to speak in another voice to yourself, really, that kind of clears your own throat. I don't know how that works, but it does. I think that's part of it. And also, it's interesting. You know, it's an interesting thing to do, and it's just another way of trying to understand the world. You know, is to talk sometimes in the voice of someone with whom you're in some conflict, but even just in the voice of someone who absolutely isn't you. You know.
Yes. Yes. You also need a really good ear to do that, so that you know when you're getting it.
Yeah, you need a fair ear, but you know, I was what they call, I guess they still do that, I was what you call a listener, so I guess my ear isn't that hot. But I think there's a lot of work involved too. That is, again, it's interesting having taught a lot, because you go back and forth between the experience of students, which basically is your own early experience, you know, so you're reminded again and again. So what, one of the things students will do, or people who are writing, you know, doesn't have to be a student, can be a person. One of the things they'll do is hand you something, and then they'll say, "But I really don't have a good ear." Well, the thing is, I really believe people can, by paying attention a great deal to others, with or without a good ear, and then by reading aloud a lot. If you keep reading it aloud, you'll know where it's wrong.
Yes.
I mean, most people. Well, some people, it's true. I mean, there are people you stand next to when there's some common singing, and you move away fast. You know, they're going to throw everything off. But most people, I think, have enough if they're willing to do the work, and if they have the attention to those other lives, and they read aloud and speak it aloud to themselves again and again. I think they'll be just as good as anybody.
Well, I think myself that it's not just the hard work of paying attention and of doing it over again, but that there's also some really profound respect for other lives, other beings.
I would call that the attention to those lives. Yeah, I hope I feel like that. I mean, I hope.
But
I do feel like that, and I hope it seems as though I do.
That's the way you read to me, certainly. Would you mind reading for us?
Sure.
One of my favorite pieces, which is the Midrash on Happiness.
Okay.
From 365 Reasons Not to Have Another War.
Okay.
And maybe you could tell our viewers what a midrash is,
well,
because in Minnesota we don't all know that.
Well, in New York people don't know it, in Vermont and Alabama and so forth, California. Well, we can't mention all the states. A midrash on happiness. A midrash is like a commentary, something the rabbis all did, and now all the rest of us are doing it because we want to comment on various texts. But in this particular case, we're commenting on happiness. Midrash on happiness. What she meant by happiness, she said, was the following. She meant having or having had or continuing to have everything. By everything, she meant first the children, then a dear person to live with, preferably a man, but not necessarily. By live with, she meant for a long time, but not necessarily. Along with, and not in preferential order, she required 3 or 4 best women friends to whom she could tell every personal fact and then discuss on the widest, deepest, and most hopeless level the economy, the constant, unbeatable, cruel war economy, the slavery of the American worker to the idea of that economy, the complicity of male people in the whole structure, the dumbness of men, including her preferred man on this subject. By dumbness she meant everything dumbness has always meant, silence and stupidity. By silence she meant refusal to speak. By stupidity she meant refusal to hear. For happiness she required women to walk with, to walk in the city arm in arm with a woman friend, as her mother had with aunts and cousins so many years ago, was just plain essential. Oh, those long walks and intimate talks, better than standing alone, better than standing alone on the most admirable mountain or in the handsomest forest or hay-blown field, all of which were certainly splendid occupations for the wind-starved soul. More important even, though maybe less sweet because of age, than the old walks with boys she'd walked with as a girl, that nice bunch of worried left-wing boys who flew, always slightly handicapped by that idealistic wing, into a dream of paid-up mortgages with a small room for opinion and solitude in the corner of home. Remember those fellows, Ruthie? Remember, I'm married to one. But she had, Faith continued, democratically tried walking in the beloved city with a man, but the effort had failed, since from about that age, 27 or 8, he had felt an obligation, if a young woman passed, to turn abstractedly away in the middle of the most personal conversation, or even to say confidentially, "Wasn't she something?" or clasping his plaid shirt at the heart's level. Oh my God. I have a slight cold. Excuse me. The purpose of this, perhaps, to work a nice, quiet appreciation into thunderous heartbeat, as he had been taught on pain of sexual death. For happiness she also required work to do in this world and bread on the table. By work to do, she included the important work of raising children righteously up. By righteously she meant that along with being useful and speaking truth to the community, they must do no harm. By harm she meant not only personal injury to the friend, the lover, the co-worker, the parent, the city, the nation, but also the stranger. She meant particularly the stranger, in all her or his difference, who, because we were strangers in Egypt, deserve special goodness for life, or at least until the end of strangeness. By bread on the table she meant no metaphor, but truly bread, as her father had ended every single meal with a hunk of bread. By hunk she was describing one of the attributes of good bread. Suddenly she felt she had left out a couple of things. Love. Oh, yes, she said, for she was talking all this time to patient Ruth, and they were walking, for some reason, in a neighborhood where she didn't know the children, the pizza places, or the vegetable markets. It was early evening, and she could see lovers walking along Riverside Park with their arms around one another, turning away from the sun, which now sets among the new apartment houses of New Jersey, to kiss. Oh, I forgot, she said. Now that I notice, Ruthie, I think I would die without love. By love she probably meant she would die without being in love. By in love she meant the acuteness of the heart at the sudden sight of a particular person, or the way over a couple of years of interested friendship one is suddenly stunned by the lungs longing for more and more breath in the presence of that friend, or nearly drowned to the knees by the salty spring that seems to beat for years on our vaginal shores. Not to omit all sorts of imaginings, which assure great spiritual energy for months, and when luck follows truth, years. Sure, love. I think so too sometimes, said Ruth, willing to hear Faith out, since she had been watching the kissers too. But I'm really not so sure. Nowadays it seems like pride. I mean overweening pride. When you look at the children and think we don't have time to do much. By time, Ruth meant both her personal time and the planet's time. When I read the papers and hear all this boom bellicosity, the guys out daring each other, I see we have to change it all. The world, without killing it absolutely. Without killing it. That'll be the trick the kids will have to figure out. Until that happens, I don't understand happiness, what you mean by it. Then Faith was ashamed to have wanted so much and so little all at the same time. To be so easily and personally satisfied in this terrible place, when everywhere vast public suffering rose in reeling waves from the round Earth's nation-states, hung in the satellite-watched air and settled in no time at all into TV sets and newsrooms. It was all there. Look up, and the news of halfway around the planet is falling on us all. So, for all these conscientious and technical reasons, Faith was ashamed. It was clear that happiness could not be worthwhile, with so much conversation and so little revolutionary change. Of course, Faith said, I know all that. I do. But sometimes, walking with a friend, I forget the world.
Oh. I love that Midrash, Grace. That is so pleasing to me, partly because of the deep concern for the stranger, and partly because of the way it turns on itself, devours its own tail, and laughs at itself. There's a generosity of spirit there that I admire very much. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the way in which you connect the different traditions in your life that maybe they're not so different. The Jewish tradition of your parents who were Russian Jews. Is that right? They were both immigrants?
Oh, yeah.
And so you're a first generation born here. And they brought a radical political tradition with them, critical and radical, which you have continued in your life. Yeah. And also a fine arts tradition of writing. I mean, you're a very fine writer, and what you do, I think, has usually been called belles lettres.
No kidding.
Yeah. And it's not a usual combination. This,
really?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I grew up with people, first of all, speaking 3 different languages: English, Russian, and Yiddish. And I always think that's very useful. Not because, not for the usual reasons, but if you meet many writers who've had 2 languages in their ears, there's something about the, sort of dialectical or something. There's something about the way these languages bump into each other and sort of make some kind of extra noise, in your head that gives you a feeling for language and what language can do, because it does different things in different languages. So I don't know. I think that's part of it, and I've seen that in like a couple of the really terrific. A writer in Brazil, a woman named Clarice Lispector, who also had Portuguese and maybe Russian and Yiddish too. It's sort of interesting to me anyway. Or I had a Greek student, a wonderful book called God's Snake, Irene Spanitu, who also had Greek and English, so it's and writes a wonderful English. That's part of it, and part of it I think for people who have any kind of a I think that my feeling for literature became very strong as I wrote as a child and as I read poetry, and it was mostly English poetry. I mean, that's what it was, and that was my literary ear, what I call my literary ear, that developed, and later when I began to write more prose, I had my more neighborhood ear that came in, and the ear of home. So both these ears together. But another interesting thing that I feel lucky in the sense that the Old Testament, the biblical tradition, the storytelling of my of my family, which really had a lot to do with all those old stories, and which related me back, to the Hebrew tradition, which was not carried, which my family didn't live, because they were not just not religious; they were furiously anti-religious, but they were very still very Jewish in identification, and that Old Testament actually is a great piece of English literature.
Oh yes,
and at the same time, it's the story of my people, if you want to put it that way. So that connection, which is quite it's accidental in a sense, and it's not one I thought about until much later, because I was a really a big reader of that book.
Yes.
That came together before I even asked it to.
So to have
in a funny way, and of course for my family's politics, which they had in Russia, but in 1905. I mean, my father was imprisoned in those years in Siberia, but under the Tsar. For their politics, the prophets, if the prophets are great for all of that. I mean, Isaiah is great, and and Micah and all that. It all works together.
Wonderful critical voices.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I wouldn't have put it together in that way, but of course that's true.
Yeah, well, I only put it together myself, thinking about it for a long time, really.
There are a couple of other things that I'd like to talk about in the time that remains to us, and some of them are your international travels. You've been to places. Well, you've been to Chile.
I never went anywhere till I never even saw California till I was about 45. So go on. Well, go ahead.
That's all right. You've packed a lot of international travel into the last 20 years. You've been to Chile.
Yeah.
And to the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And to China.
Yeah.
As well as to Europe many times. Yes.
A couple of times.
Several times.
Right.
Who are the writers that you feel closest to in the world now?
You mean well, I mean, there's some wonderful writers I can think of. There's a wonderful East German writer, a woman named Christa Wolf, who, if she was I always like to say, if she were a Middle European, Czechoslovakian, or Hungarian male, she'd be the most famous person in Europe.
Yes.
Yeah. But she's a very great writer. There's a wonderful woman, and I don't know, but she may even have died, which I hate that when people die and you don't know it.
Yes.
Elsa Morante, a very great book called
Italian,
History.
Yeah, Italian novelist.
Those are wonderful books. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, just for an example of things. There's a young woman, not Christa Wolf, I guess about 60. She seems young to me. She just, when I see her. And a Brazilian writer named Nelida Pinhon, who is also a marvelous writer and who was just translated as a book called The Republic of Dreams. It's her first translation, I think.
That's a beautiful title, The Republic of Dreams.
Yeah. It's an interesting book because here in the United States we have lots of books that are great immigrant stories. Well, South America is a country of immigrants too, in the same way.
Yes, very much.
And so it's really about that. Somebody who comes from Spain or Portugal, Spain, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know it's always
to their new world. You know, they are all those South American countries.
Yes.
Are the new world.
It's always a little surprising for North Americans to realize that there are lots of Asians in Brazil and Argentina and German-speaking people and Italian-speaking people.
Yeah.
That's true. Well, your work unites those strands as well. Would you read a poem or two from Leaning Forward?
Sure.
Okay.
Get my glasses out again.
All right. This one reminds me of some of your short stories about children on the streets of New York speaking different languages.
Yeah. Simple little poem.
Yeah.
Children walking with their grandmothers talk foreign languages. That is the nature of this city and also this country. Talk is cheap, but comes in variety and witnessing dialect. There is a rule for all, and in each sentence a perfect grammar.
That's marvelous.
That's good.
And then there's one about remembering your mother. I think it's page 42.
Yeah, 42. This one you mean?
No, this one. Some days I am lonesome.
Some days I am lonesome. I want to talk to my mother, and she isn't home. Then I ask my father, where has she been the last 20 years? And he answers, where do you think, you fool, as usual? She is asleep in Abraham's bosom, resting from years of your incessant provocation, exhausted by infinite love of me, escaping from the boredom of days shortening to Christmas and the pain of days lengthening to Easter. You know where she is. She is at ease in Zion with all the other dead Jews. I don't really understand that poem.
I'm not sure I do either, but I love it.
Yes.
It says so much about being a Jew in America.
Yes.
It's very rich.
Yeah.
And there was one other that I wanted you to read because these three poems, to me, define a certain latitude in your work. It's the poem called That Year, and it was also in here, but I don't know which copy of it you want to read.
Yeah, it's in there. They're all in a slightly different...
different form?
Yeah. Okay. That year. In my family, people who are 82 were very different from people who were 92. The 82-year-old people grew up. It was 1914. This is what they knew. War, World War, war. That's why when they speak to the child, they say, poor little one. The 92-year-old people remember it was the year 1905. They went to prison. They went into exile. They said, ah, soon. When they speak to the grandchild, they say, yes, there will be revolution. There will be revolution. Then, once more, then the earth itself will turn and cry out, oh, I have been made sick. Then you, my little buds, must flower and save it.
Thank you. I think that's a good Earth Day or
Yeah.
Earth Month
Yes,
or
it is.
Earth Year poem. Do you want to say a word or two about Vermont, where you live now, in terms of the earth being made sick, or
Well,
Or saving the earth, or?
Well, you know, I just, I've lived in the city most of my life, so the fact that I live now in my husband's home state and hometown in Vermont is for me an extraordinary gift and experience, and it has nothing much to do with. I mean, it doesn't mean that I hate the city or anything like that. I love it and miss it, but
not too much, I hope.
No, but the experience of really living a rural life is a very different one, and has certainly it hasn't made me more concerned about the earth in that sense, but I do think there's a lot of sentimental stuff attached to all of this, and I think that while people are thinking about the earth and what it means, and thinking about our water, which when you don't live in a city, you really know what your well is like and things like that. I mean, while we're thinking about all of those things, we should think about where the toxicity is coming from, who's making it. It isn't just magic. Someone is making it. Someone is being careless with your life, and I think we have to think about that. That there are companies that are refusing to make changes in their exhaust systems,
right?
And there are people who are driving cars who don't care what their exhaust systems do and so forth. And it isn't just personal carelessness. It's you must be. I mean, you have to personally be responsible, and you should recycle, and all that is very important. But you have to really also know that it's not your personal private fault. You didn't ask for everything to be packaged the way it's packaged.
Right.
You know, you did not make those requests. You didn't say that, and you didn't demand that your foods have certain things in it.
Right.
So I would just end with that, really.
That would be the topic for a whole nother half-hour program.
You're right.
Next time you come to Minnesota, maybe we can do that. Talk about rural life and the health of the earth.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Grace
you.
Paley. And thank you very much for tuning in.
Yeah.
My name is Martha Roth. I've been having a discussion with Grace Paley. Thanks again.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.